You're listening to The Discovery Pod, a podcast dedicated to conversations with leaders in the social profit sector. Discover the origin stories of CEOs, founders, and other senior leaders, and learn from them so you can accomplish what is most important. Now, on with the show with your host, Douglas Nelson.
Welcome to The Discovery Pod. I'm your host, Douglas Nelson. For today's episode, we have another special one. This conversation was recorded live at our Discovery Dialogues event in Toronto, centered around a question we believe many leaders across the sector are asking right now. What does it actually take to achieve transformational change? Because transformation isn't only about scale. It's not reserved for the largest organizations, biggest campaigns, or even the most ambitious growth plans. Whether you're leading a national organization or a community-based nonprofit, the reality is the same. Transformational change asks something of us all. At the Discovery Group, we have the privilege of working alongside leaders at every stage of that journey. Some are building towards significant expansion. Others are rethinking long-standing systems, cultures, or approaches. But across organizations of every size, we hear many of the same questions. How do we bring people with us? How do we sustain momentum? How do we stay grounded in our mission while navigating change? For this conversation, we are joined by Kelly Cole, President and CEO of Sunnybrook Foundation, and Aaron Sanderson, CEO of Kids Help Phone Foundation. Together, they reflect on leading through transformation, building alignment around a vision, and what it takes to move big ideas forward. No matter the size of your organization or where you are in your own journey of change, there's something in this conversation for every leader. Let's get into it.
All right. Thank you. And welcome to another edition of the Discovery Pod. We are here at the Center for Social Innovation in Toronto, our Toronto home for the Discovery Group. And our topic today is preparing for transformation, what it takes to get things done. Our guests, Kelly Cole and Aaron Sanderson Kelly Cole from the Sunnybrook Hospital Foundation and Aaron from the Kids Help Phone Foundation. Welcome.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Happy to be here.
Well, this is going to go so well. I'm just sure of it. So as we said at the outset, the theme of this is about transformation. So maybe I'll start with you, Kelly. What has transformation meant for your organization over the last number of years?
Well, we've been on a long journey, as you know. And so some of the things that I want to share are things that have taken time to build. I don't want you to think that it started and was accomplished overnight. So when I first was recruited about 5.5 years ago, the hospital was wanting to build a big building, and that started their ambition. And they thought about how much money that was going to require to build a massive, $4 to $5 billion type building. And this was taking us into fundraising that we hadn't done before. And at the same time, they were thinking about their research and innovation agenda and wanting to transform it. And again, very significant ambition. And it was very exciting. But what we came into was an organization that it was very entrepreneurial, I think, in the way that I kind of categorize it. It was, having some really great years. It wasn't sustainable, kind of ongoing delivery at a certain level. And they hadn't done a campaign for about 20 years. And even the last campaign, I'm not sure we would have defined it as comprehensive. So it was a big undertaking and a big shift for the organization. And the board knew what they wanted. The hospital knew what they wanted. But of course, they didn't know how we were going to get there. And so the initial phases was really around working with the leadership team, aligning with the board around a growth plan, and figuring out where do we need to fill in gaps, where do we need to grow, where do we need to add, how do we focus, how do we pick the right things, how do we ensure that the board understands what those right things are, and get them all down on paper and get everybody aligned. And so what happened over the 5 years was there was huge cultural shifts, greater collaboration across the team, across divisions. There was greater collaboration across the hospital between the fundraisers and the hospital, shifting to data driven decisions, shifting to a major gift team that could go out on their own and raise money with hospital leaders, not needing the CEO to be the front of every major gift solicitation. It was a big shift It wasn't that there wasn't any happening. It was just that there was a shift to really get the team thinking that way. And so there was a lot of this change that was happening. And I think the other really big thing, and you just cut me off when you need me to stop.
I know better than that.
There were two other really substantial things that happened at that time. One was from the get-go, the CEO of the hospital, Dr. Andy Smith, he and I were fully aligned. He was really bought in to what we had to accomplish together. And he knew that we wouldn't be successful without him and the whole hospital behind. And he was just a constant champion of hospital and foundation, one team, Team Sunnybrook. We're fully aligned. He just constantly is there talking about the foundation. And that has permeated through the whole organization, board, executive leaders, programs, all the way through. And that is a significant difference for us in how we operate. The other thing that came later in the growth plan, not in the initial part, was later in the growth plan, we started to work towards understanding our unrestricted revenue flows. I'm sure everybody can nod and take that in and say, yes, how do you grow when you have limited dollars? And we spent time figuring out what were our unrestricted sources, how do we grow them, how do we create sustainability in our organization around our unrestricted funding, how do we create strategic reserve fund, and then how do we bring the board along in that journey to understand and not say, oh, let's spend that money. Let's hold that money. Let's figure out how we're strategically using that money. And that has been a very, very good success story for us and has supported us in the growth of our campaign. And it went on further. I won't go into all the details, but really getting everybody geared around, we need unrestricted. Where does that start? where does it end? How do we think about it for major gifts, community giving, any revenue, parking revenue, contributions coming off of our major gifts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a lot to be unpacked around the source of funding for unrestricted funds. So I just really wanted to stress. Okay, I'm going to stop.
Well, that's great. And there's a lot of follow-up questions that I could think of. But Aaron, what has transformation meant at Kids Help Phone over the last couple of years?
I think my answer is similar, but it's at a different scale. And we're at a different level of maturity at our organization. And I'll take you back to January 2020 when I started. And of course, only a few months later, we were deep into the middle of a pandemic, which had, of course, different impacts to different organizations. But one of the things that happened to Kids Help Phone was we exploded in demand for our services. We had over 250% growth in demand for services almost overnight. And I was like 3 months in. And all of the plan for the year was really out the door. And at the point in time at the organization, even in 2019, largely we were raising what we needed for the year and then starting from zero at the top of the year and doing the same. And that has a major impact to the way the organization plans, how staff think about their roles and the programs that they lead. If you're not sure the resources will be in place for you the following year, it's really hard to make commitments to communities that you serve when you're really not sure what the future holds for you. And so not only did we have the demands of the pandemic and need to rise to the occasion in terms of the funds that were needed to sustain that service volume, but we also needed to shift the way that we were thinking about our fundraising so that we could have more multi-year planning. And so we did two things at the same time. One was scale rapidly in terms of our fundraising success so that we can continue to meet the demand for even just the labor hours, for example, for our counselors. And the other thing was thinking more multi-year. And it was an interesting process where we asked our colleagues, if you had all of the resources that you think you could deploy for the greatest degree imaginable for this program area, what would that look like for you? And it was really one of the first times anyone had asked to dream about that because it just didn't seem like a possibility. This is the scarcity model that you were talking about, Doug. And so we sort of got ourselves together with our funding opportunities. We had a reason to talk to donors about making a multi-year commitment and started to grow from there. And I remember there were some very tough conversations along the way where the whole executive team on the Zoom screen turned to me and said, should we start laying people off? Should we stop hiring? Should we be in a hiring freeze? Do you think you can continue to keep up? And at that moment, with the best information that we had and a lot of grit, we kept going. And so I'm just really grateful that we were able to accomplish both of those things at the same time, which took a lot. but it also sort of catapulted us into a new level of maturity as an organization.
And talk a little bit about any changes in your job recently?
Just a little shift.
Yeah.
So that change in the campaign that we had was a successful $300 million goal. We raised $333 million by the time we were done that campaign. From the start of the pandemic time all the way through to the end of 2024. And then the board had been engaged in a conversation around succession planning and also asked themselves a really good question. If we are fundamentally different as an organization based on the growth that we've had over the course of the last, at that time, about 3-4 years, how might we govern ourselves differently? What do we need to change about the way that we're approaching the organization? And so we, after a lot of careful consideration, moved towards a strategy where we have a 2-entity model, a Kids Help Phone Foundation and Kids Help Phone. It's not the traditional model where you would see sort of hospital foundation. We have a shared services approach where we have the same HR team, same IT team, same marketing teams, sharing from those departments. So a lot of collaboration continues to happen amongst the coworkers. But we now have our own foundation, our own board set up for that work. So that launched on January 1st. It's been an amazing journey. When do you get an opportunity to do that where you're not starting from scratch either? We have a group of donors that were committed to us, again, over multiple years. And we're only a little bit of the way in and learning as we go.
One of the things that's really fascinating to me about that story, Aaron, is you were designing this model, but you didn't have the job yet.
Yeah, it was really interesting. So
It worked out.
It worked out. Yeah. So, in the end, that's great. Listen, that all of you will probably say about the places that you work, but Kids Help Phone is a very special place. In fact, I met some of you today who have spent time there previously, which I think is really fun. And I want to hear about your experiences during those times. But I knew that this was the next most important thing for the organization. I knew that I had a good fighting chance for the role, but I also fundamentally knew that if I didn't get it, there wasn't going to be a job for me. And so come January, I will have helped sort of launch the ship and then cheered from the dock. But it worked out. I knew it was about November actually that I had secured the role come January 1st. So, and here I am.
Wow.
We'll continue with the conversation in a minute. At the Discovery Group, we see the expertise within your organization, and we work alongside you to amplify it. As your trusted advisor, we provide strategic counsel to build relationships, to strengthen governance, and to elevate your philanthropic efforts. We start with abundance and make it stronger. Let's build something exceptional together at thediscoverygroup.ca.
You weren't on the dock, you were driving the ship at that point. Yeah. Okay, so one of the things that happens a lot in our sector, we talk about transformation. It can often just mean big. Let's do more. And if any of you have had a not perfectly or well facilitated board retreat where the board says our new plan is to triple or double, or we just need another $1 million or $2 million in unrestricted revenue, and looks at you as the head of fundraising and goes, "So you're good for that?" That more can be quite a dangerous phrase in our work. So I want to ask the two of you to think about. Transformation is big change, but how do you avoid that trap of more? Have you avoided that so far?
I'm not sure that we've avoided the trap of more. We have delivered on more, but I would say that managing the board's expectations on what that growth might look like. And, that came through strategic planning, really laying out for them, what does this look like in the first few years? And keeping the board attuned to, we're here right now. And over the next 3 years, we're going to go from 55 million to 90 million, and we're going to get that sustainable. And that's what we're going to deliver on year in and year out. And here's the key things that are going to get us there. And then don't let the board distract you is a very big point. There were a few times where the board would, start to say, why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we doing this? And stay focused. This is what we're trying to accomplish. But you still have to deliver. So this is my point. You still have to deliver on the numbers. And they were seeing the progress on numbers and I guess having a little bit of faith in the leadership and the team to deliver and understanding the direction that we were going in. But you still have to, in those early days, deliver. But we kept talking about our campaign model is, to build up to the $100 million mark, which we achieved this year. And then for the campaign, because our campaign's $1 billion, layer in these transformational gifts to, fulfill the $1 billion. It's pretty scary to sit and think, okay, we need this transformational gift. We need one of them over the $25 million mark to land. And these gifts take like 2 to 3 years in the making. It's just a constant education, and they're very private discussions. They're not share with everybody what's going on with the 3 or 4 transformational gifts that you're working on. So you're constantly saying to the board, trust me, we've got 5 in play. We're moving forward. We've presented proposals. We're in gift discussion. We're documenting. One is coming, I promise you. That whole unrestricted model includes some of the money coming off of the transformational gifts, the contribution to the unrestricted. So you're building up to deliver. Your costs are increasing. You're managing your unrestricted, but at the same time, you're thinking about like, oh, holy crap, what if this one doesn't? And I would just say, I've always believed in the process. I've always dug in and said, do the plan, get your annual plans, understand your KPIs. You have to have a pipeline that maps to it, obviously, but then believe in the activity and the work, believe in your organization. And, we did a lot of homework in those first 3 years, the market study, all of those things, and they lead to the change.
Yeah.
And the numbers follow.
Plan and then consistent pressure over time.
Mm-hmm.
The trap of more, was that? So you're both talking about these 5 to 6 year transformations of your organizations. And Aaron, in your first example, you were talking about, can you do more to meet the need during the pandemic period? How did you approach that?
I think there's a discipline around this. More for what? And when we did the work of establishing these multi-year funding priorities, totaled them up, they were well over 300 million. And then we said to the board, here's based on what we know as good fundraising practice and what we can see in our pipeline, we think 300 million is the goal to go for. And we described that as we never wanted to be questioning where we would put one more dollar. And good thing we did it, because we surpassed the goal. We knew where to put that money. So we weren't scrambling. And so we're sort of conditioning our board to think about what is the impact that we want to have, and then let's set our goals against it. And I think that matters, because the first thing that happens when you walk out of that room and you're setting those targets is that you need to explain why to the people around the table that are going to help you get it done, the amazing team at Kids Help Fund Foundation. And it's the first question out of the donor's mouth when you sit down with them to ask them if they would consider giving. So if you're setting targets that aren't anchored in the impact, you're kind of hooped from the start.
Yeah, absolutely. Both of you in your answers demonstrate a little bit of this. Like, for those of us in the room who grew up as fundraisers, as major gift fundraisers in particular, this urgency that we feel to execute, and for the coming up about 2 months to go in the fiscal year, the high rev really kicks in. I found during the transition from being a full-time fundraiser to being a leader of organizations, it took a while for that rev to wear off. And some of my colleagues may say it hasn't worn off at all. I'm hoping you can share, how do you balance that need for patience? Because a lot of the transformation you're both describing takes time. You're talking 5.5 years for Kelly, and Aaron, you're talking about 6 years. How do you balance that patience with the urgency of the work and the urgency of the goals that you have in front of you?
I think about pace a lot, and pace does not mean that everything is moving at the same speed. Pace means that you've chosen which things need to move slow and which things can move quickly. So different parts of the business, different fundraising channels, different projects are all going to move at a different pace. It's a trap if you say they all need to be done by next month. You are going to be unsuccessful in that, most likely. So we talk about timelines for some of this work, and there are limiting factors. You can only move so fast as your culture will enable you to do that. You will only move so fast as the alignment that you have with your board. So you have to not just set targets based on ambition alone. Ambition is great. But if you're not thinking about all of those factors that will enable you to be successful, and the different sequencing that you need to have based on resource allocation and culture, that's really where I think success can come from.
I would just build on that and say that talent matters. One of the very significant changes that I've seen in our leadership team is that they have gone from being leaders of say, portfolios to leaders of organization, and seeing the impact that they have across the organization. Of course, they're still leading portfolios and delivering, but they're also very mindful of what's happening across the organization and can think about, how do I advance my portfolio? What's the timing of that? Do I need to pull back a little bit because we need to focus here? But that talent to drive, like sometimes you have to pull back in a certain area to allow for, new talent to come in before you're ready to kind of keep it moving forward. So I think talent, it has a big component to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I think has been really remarkable about the Sunnybrook story is that the investment in that talent has happened before it was a critical, everything's falling apart. So you were investing ahead of the urgency because you knew that's what was going to be needed to get from where you were to where you wanted to be.
Yeah, I think we really did do a great job of understanding what is foundational to, building platforms straight across the organization that lift up. Not surprisingly, like our board was, we need to get out, we need to spend way more on brand, we need to be out. And yes, we do, but not yet. We need to get our story, we need to get our people, we need to get our colleagues on the hospital side in play. We're going to keep building and growing and developing on the marketing side. But it's just one example where you're kind of picking and choosing as to where to invest your time and attention. Because the CEO, as like any of the leaders, and all my leaders are sitting here, but all of them, you have limited time. You have limited time. You cannot be focused on everything, and you have to decide. And we knew that if we did not deliver on the major gift portfolio as a starting point, as an example, that was, we had to have that in place. Even on the knowledge systems, we did a 3-year roadmap. We said, okay, let's hold back on CRM. We'll do it in this year because we need these other tools in place. We need to fix business processes, et cetera. So all of that planning and the importance of it and trying to make it as apparent to the board as you're doing it is really, really key.
Yeah. And speaking of board, so how did you maintain that alignment with your board? And when they suggested that bus shelters are the answer to raise $1 billion, like, yes, and a couple other things, maybe a billboard or two.
So all of our strat plans, they were heavily engaged in developing first our growth plan, which was a 3-year, and then we redid and did both our campaign plan and our 3-year strat plan, which seems like a lot of planning, but it really worked out extremely well. But getting their engagement in that, we do fall board strategy dinners, and we take a bit of a different approach. We broke them down into smaller groups. So we don't do the full board. They have an understanding going in that we're all talking about this topic, and here's the same reading material. And now we're going to have much more in-depth conversation with a smaller group of board members. Allows them to get to know each other better, allows them to participate more. It's partly an education awareness tool. So we used one board strategy sessions were all based around, should we do a capital campaign or a comprehensive campaign? And most of our board members didn't know what that mean, at the beginning. They were like, well, what are we talking about? And so it allowed us to really go deep on how do you campaign and what's important and what's going to be important for us. And they could get their heads around the strategy. And by the time you iterate with them and bring it back, by the time we would start in September, we got to January, they were like, okay, yep, this is it. But they were a part of it. They were embedded in it, as well as the leadership team. And then I think it's just, don't forget that they have 2 months between meetings.
Right.
It's repetition over and over and again to remind them, this is our strategy. Remember, we said we're going to do this. Here's this. It's laddering up to something bigger.
Absolutely. And Aaron, you were describing a process that sounded quite board-led in terms of looking at what was the best way to organize the governance of Kids Help Phone. As a senior leader in the organization, as a person on point for what hopefully being able to get on the ship at the end of that, building it, how did that feel as you were guiding or stewarding or watching? What's the right verb there?
It's a great question. I mean, the senior management team was deeply involved, and we had some strategic advisors. I mean, At one point, we had done some financial modeling, and I'm sitting in the boardroom and having Deloitte ask me questions about why I believe these might be true. And it was just going through the rigor of, we're going to make a big decision that's going to be sort of life-changing for the organization. And we want to make sure that we have the best thinking from not just bottom up, but also top down. And so, yes, the board was interested in how they might need to reformat the governance for the organization, but they really came at that as half of the equation. It was really collaborative to go through the process. And now what we find ourselves in at this stage is about half of the board team for the foundation are those directors that were part of the decision previously, and about half of them are new. So when we talk about alignment, it's a really interesting conversation because some people don't have that history, and some people deeply went through it, like quite an extensive process to examine that. So we have these two perspectives at the board table around what's possible in this fresh new environment, and some expectations from the other half around what we expected to be true. So when we talk about alignment, it's also alignment amongst the board directors as well as that with management.
Right. So both of you have described what are very significant changes as leaders transforming the organizations that you lead. How has leading that transformation changed your leadership style? Does any of Kelly's team want to weigh in on?
Well, it definitely changed significantly between my previous job and my current job. Mm-hmm. But I would say it took me kind of 2 years. In some ways, I look back and I think, oh, yeah, it took me a while to kind of figure out what's different in this that I need to really understand. And if you engage with your leadership team on an annual basis, and you engage with your executive team, in my case, the board, and you listen to them, and you use your campaign council very effectively, you can have that conversation as you go through performance review each year and think about, where is my organization at? And I think that's probably the kind of the fundamental change. I would always be thinking about, what do I need to be doing? What am I doing? What am I working on? What am I moving? And I started to think about, oh, it's not me individually. It's, what should the CEO be doing? What does the organization need from me right now? What's shifting? And those people around you will guide you so effectively. The executive committee of the board at one point said, okay, you've got your leadership team in place. You've got your plan. They're working through. You need to get out. COVID, somewhat over at that point, but not kind of. But you need to start pushing out. And what does that look like? And with each year, that push out has gotten stronger. And, now it's media and events, and how are you showing up? And what are you doing for the organization to lift the whole organization up? Those kinds of things. So it's a real shift in where you spend time, allow your leaders to lead. They can come in and take over responsibilities maybe that you used to have. And use your campaign council, because he's led before, and he's a good sounding board. He's also a good social worker. So you can say, I'm really nervous about this if I take my eye off. And he knows the team, so he can say, yep, they've got it. Good for you, Kelly. Get out of it.
That's great. For our audience, she's pointing at me. Okay. Thank you, Kelly. Aaron, what has that change been like for you?
We had conversation, and actually we even had a moment this morning. I'm smiling at my coworkers here. We had a conversation about, if we were going to live into this vision for transformation that we have, it should feel very different. I should be doing different things. You should be doing different things. And that we also need to recognize there are things that we really love. I love fundraising. I love spending time with donors. It's a joyful thing in my day. And also, I might have to do less of it, because that might not be the job that we want the CEO to do in this new format. And so, quite frankly said to my two fantastic colleagues here, you may need to remind me of that. You may need to ask me, is this something that you should be doing, or is this something that I should be doing? And we even this morning had a conversation about that. And so giving permission for others to help remind you or guide you, truly, this is a form of support, as well as you trying to shift your mindset, because that group of donors still knows me, but it might be time for them to be engaging more with someone else on maybe a day-to-day basis, so that I might do some more of the work on setting up the governance, for example. So that shift has been hard, but it's exciting. It stretches you in different ways. I find that really stimulating. And you should call upon the other people very transparently in your life to help you make that shift.
I was going to just add that I'm thinking about your transition, and it was such a change to go from being a VP and working for a president of an organization to being the president of a foundation and reporting to a board. And I remember a colleague of mine, Ted Gerard, I'm sure many of you know, he said to me when I was going into the position, 33% of your time is on board. We have that many meetings? He's like, no. But you're on the phone, you're doing one-on-one, you're constantly in your office thinking about who needs to know what, how do you move them, how do you think about them, what connections are you making? All of that, just keeping them at the forefront, making sure your chair is fully prepared, knows what they're doing, knows how to support you, chairs of all your committees. He just was really good at driving that home. And that is a huge part of having a board.
Yeah. In our work at the Discovery Group, we often ask CEOs, how much time are you spending on the care and maintenance of your board? And the answer is usually 25 to 40%, and in some cases, 60 or 70%. Those are tough jobs in an organization going through tough times usually. But that 25 to 40% is very consistent. And then we've asked over the course of our work, we've asked more than 1,000 board directors that same question. What percentage of your CEO's time do you think she dedicates to supporting the board? The answer is not higher. It's significantly lower. And so a board member or a committee chair even will usually say 5 to 10%. And a board chair will usually say, it's maybe 20%, maybe a quarter. So the board chairs tend to have more sense. But if you think, why don't they understand how hard I'm working? It's that they think you're only spending 5% of your time talking to them. And you're like, no, this is 40% of my day. This is 2 days a week. And so there is a real difference. And there is a lot of value. And a lot of what Kelly shared is an example of that, of showing the work to your board of what it means to do that. This is what we're doing. And repeating it over and over again, not for a pat on the back, but just a reminder for the weight of the world we are moving is very heavy, and we're doing it together. But I'm spending a lot more than 5% talking to you all. But say it nicer. We're going to draw to the end. We got one quick question. So if you give short answers to this question, then we'll get to the questions from the audience. Aaron, what are you looking forward to?
Gosh, I'm looking forward to lots. I'm looking forward to living out this year as a new entity, and we're learning lots every day. I think more than anything, I should, and I do believe that this is the thing that we needed to do to really advance the work in this next phase of our organizational trajectory. And I think the need is so clear. I don't care what organization you work at, you probably have experienced the youth mental health crisis some way personally in your life or in your circle. And I think that is the promise of Kids Help Phone. I think we've done the work that we needed to do to be able to be positioned to be more successful and more rapid in our response to the crisis. And I can't wait to see that start to unfold.
That's wonderful. Kelly?
Yeah, very similar. Just think about the impact of what this campaign is going to do. And really looking forward to putting the shovel in the ground. Personally, putting the shovel in the ground for the new critical care center, but also one of the big gifts we announced last week was around clinical trials, and just really excited to see what that's going to mean for Sunnybrook, but for also all of Canada. There's nothing better than seeing a donor or a volunteer, and I enjoy both, just when they realize the impact that they're having. And we're starting to see that with some of the volunteers. One of our cabinet members was very instrumental in the gift and building that relationship. And, they're just so proud of the work that they're doing. So that's fun.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you both so much for being a part of the Discovery Dialogues here in Toronto. Thanks to all of our audience. We're going to move to Q&A, but first, a round of applause for our panel, please.
Thank you. Hi. Aaron, I heard talk about impact. I love hearing talk about impact and how that's what started things. And then you determined your fundraising goal from there. I wondered if you could just talk a bit about how you define the impact or the impact objective of Kids Help Phone.
Ooh, that's great. So one of the really beautiful things about Kids Help Phone is that there was already a culture of measuring everything. Like the data was already there, the sort of culture of making data-informed decisions. What are youth struggling with? How are we going to adapt to that? How are we preparing the clinical staff? One of the things that we hear from our counseling colleagues is They love being part of Kids Help Phone because you are the leading edge of your practice. As issues emerge, we react to that. And that's where the training and the professional development comes in. So it was already sort of in the mix that we were doing that work. We just hadn't applied the thinking to how would that extend to a particular program area or service? What would it mean if you had all the funding that you needed over a multi-year period to see the fullest expression of this program have the largest impact? They already were familiar with the impact measures. So it was more of almost a budgeting exercise and thinking about pacing and scale. So all the ingredients were there that we just hadn't given them the license to do that dreaming over a multi-year period or think fully in abundance. So the work wasn't to try to find the way to measure the work that we're doing. We did that already really well, which was very enabling to the whole process.
I have a structural question on governance, but I have a staff member right now. I'm a big supporter of Kids Help Phone. Kathy Hay was on my board. I'm at Mental Health Research Canada, but I have a staff member right now that worked at Kids Help Phone in its early years. You might be too young to remember. But at that time, the foundation was separate from the core operations at that time. And then they amalgamated a number of years later, and now they've separated again. So I'm just wondering about the pros and cons of having it as one model versus two, and obviously an organization that's gone from 2 to 1 to 2. So there's different thinking, different leadership, et cetera, different priorities, I guess, around that.
So maybe I can push that to you, because I'm sure when the idea was, let's launch this foundation, there were people around who were like, we already tried that.
We did that a while ago. We also have kept up relationships with our former directors. And even there's 2 of our founders are still living. They sat down with us in the boardroom and talked about when they made the decision to amalgamate, what the context was during the time. And I won't say who, but there's an organization that reached out to me recently. We're speaking on Monday with their whole board, me and their board, to talk about this idea that they're contemplating right now, whether or not they want to spin out a foundation. And my advice to them, from what I understand, is don't do it. And I think that there's very specific context within that stage of your organizational growth. Kids Help Fund actually didn't start as a registered charity itself. It was actually the Canadian Children's Foundation, which already had a charitable license that was funding this programmatic work. So even then, it was a different model. After that, they sort of amalgamated into one, then split out into a foundation. When they made the decision to amalgamate those 2, it was at a time where the organization was struggling to get by. The resources weren't abundant. And so the work that was required to sustain the 2 entities and the governance behind them wasn't delivering a benefit to them that they felt was right for their stage. We're at a different moment now in the organization's history. There's more sophistication around that. When we thought about the governance needs between clinical expertise and innovation and technology, research, as well as fundraising, we're starting to demand a lot from the board. And we learned how far we could go when we had a stable of volunteers through our campaign cabinet that were active in our fundraising work, and thought, okay, with all of these ingredients, maybe now is the time for us to contemplate a 2-entity model. So I think it just really matters where you're at in your life cycle as an organization, what you want, what your ambitions might look like, and then think about what structure would support that.
The details matter a lot, for sure. I would say the way to ensure it will not work if you're 1 going to 2 is if the goal is to make fundraising somebody else's problem. So we've seen that happen a couple of times, which is very good for our work, good for our business, but not very good for the organizations. So whether it is 2, whether it is 1, the idea that philanthropy is at the core of the operating entity and the foundation needs to be an important part of it. You can't subcontract fundraising down the hall to a newly spun out foundation. I haven't seen it work.
So I'm thinking of some of the folks in the room who are leaders of much smaller organizations. So what does it take, if you could distill everything that you've learned and everything that you do into just what are the few actions? Like, what does it take to get big things done when you are the CEO and the chief fundraising officer and the marketing officer and what do you think are the few things, and you have the same sort of ambition, right? You want to get things done, but you're working much more nimbly. What are the few qualities or actions that you would recommend focusing on?
I think every organization requires, a vision for where you're going, a belief in it, I mean, the CEO has to believe that it's feasible, it's possible. There is a pathway. You can show them the pathway of what we're going to go down, regardless of size of organization and what you're trying to accomplish. I mean, it has to be realistic and grounded in data, pipeline. I mean, my early days fundraising, I just can hear my boss in my head saying, we need to know where the money's going to come from. We don't have a path. And so I think all of these things, it really is, do we have the vision? Do we know what we're trying to accomplish? For sure. I mean, back to your comment about the two boards, that alignment with whatever your organization is, whether you're reporting up through one structure or two structures, that alignment around what you're trying to accomplish and being able to articulate it back to the impact, what are we delivering on at the end of the day? If you don't have that, you're just going to flounder. And you hear it, lots of organizations, I'm sure you know that some of the healthcare organizations in other provinces where they have these very unique structures around trying to figure out what their funding priorities are. All of that, it's just really important. But when you know what you're trying to accomplish, even when it's $10 million, I have a specific, I know what we're how we're going to get there, bring in the volunteers around it. The elements are still, I think, very much the same. And maybe to our earlier question around how do you spend your time, you're going to adjust your time as CEO because you're going to spend more time maybe doing the actual fundraising, that sort of thing.
I started fundraising, I was a CEO of a small organization, so de facto fundraiser. And I was doing great until sick kids walked in with a teddy bear and I didn't have a hope in hell, right? And then later on, I had a kid that was sick and I was so grateful for that. Your causes, like you have this amazing hospital and you have amazing mental health, which you're right. Anybody that doesn't know somebody in their life where their youth doesn't have a mental health issue. What is your advice for some of the sort of harder issues like the, purpose economy or injury or social planning, those kinds of organizations that are critical infrastructure for the system, but are not showing up with a teddy bear?
I'm going to go back just a little bit. I was formerly at the university, but both the university and the hospital, there are definitely elements within our fundraising that is, let's say, less sexy, less interesting, less, appealing, great cause. And so it's harder. I think the volunteer component is so significant. Who are your champions? How do you get them to help rally around what you're trying to accomplish? And a lot of time spent figuring out who really cares. I do think that it's much harder work. I've worked in a couple of organizations where our databases were, I say rich, but just we had phenomenal databases. And it was more about working around how do I prioritize my time to get the maximum out of this group of individuals. And I've also worked in organizations. I worked for a small hospital foundation where it was really about how do I identify a donor and how do I spend time? It's way more work for sure in the identification stage, but your volunteers, your frontline people, like we use obviously physicians, grateful patients, that sort of thing, but understanding, finding out who is interested in what we're trying to accomplish, and then building from there. Because without that, it doesn't matter how much money they have. You've got to have passion first.
I think that's well said. I very purposely, when I left Sick Kids, went to a much smaller organization. I went to War Child Canada, and still children. Children is a theme throughout my entire career. But part of that was learning for myself. Am I as good as I think I am? I'm not behind this giant brand where we have surprises every day. That definitely wasn't the case at War Child. And I think there is a degree of difficulty. I think your storytelling needs to be really tight and believe those that show you that they're passionate and believe in their potential too, whether they're raising the money for you or donating it themselves. And then really understanding the profile of those people that your cause resonates with and getting really darn good at finding out how to pinpoint those others that might be out there that would feel the same. I remember finding emails for folks and emailing them and saying, I know you have a passion for international development and I want to talk to you about this issue. That's how I was getting my first meetings at War Child with people that had no history with the organization. There's probably comparables in there for you, So I think it's twofold. It's exactly what you said. Finding those that are passionate, that are already behind the organization, and dialing up that relationship to see what the results might be. And then really getting specific about the profile of those that you know the cause is resonating with.
Those are both great answers. A very specific tool to think of or take away, I'll leave you with. I'm happy to talk about after. One of the challenges of building a donor base for an organization that hasn't been involved in philanthropy is we have this instinct to teach, to explain. If we could just explain, if people just knew, they would give. And those of us who've spent our lives in fundraising know that is absolutely not how it works at all. You cannot educate and fundraise in the same conversation. So one of the ways to shortcut that is to talk about your organization and your purpose through through a donor lens, through the eyes of your donors. So you can say, our donors enable us, and then you can start to educate. But lead with the fact that it's a normal thing for good people to give good money to your organization. Lead with, our donors enable, or because of our donors, we have been exploring, or we have working with the folks that are critical to your organization. We've identified an opportunity for donors to play a really significant role in, and then talk about that. Put it through the lens of philanthropy. It shortens some of the education, and it certainly opens up the conversation to be about giving sooner. You'll avoid that situation when you tell somebody about the great work of your organization and they sit back and they go, wow, good for you. And that's the end of the conversation. And that's the end of our time for the podcast today. Thank you all so much for being here. Let's get one more round of applause.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Discovery Pod. Be sure to tune in next week for another inspiring and informative conversation. Don't forget to visit our website, thediscoverygroup.ca, for more resources. If you like what you just listened to, please subscribe and tell a friend about it. Until next time, keep working to make your organization exceptional.